The barn that broke a town. It was the kind of night where the air felt like it was holding its breath, heavy with the scent of pine and the distant hum of crickets. In the small town of Willow Creek, where nothing much happened unless you counted the annual pie contest, a barn was about to become the center of a storm nobody saw coming. My name's Tom Wheeler, and I was just a city guy visiting my cousin Ray Tucker for a week to escape the grind of emails and traffic. I figured I'd get some dirt on my boots, maybe help Ray fix a fence. Instead, I got a front row seat to the dumbest, wildest war this town had ever seen. It all started at 2 a.m. when 6 shadowy figures, dressed like they'd watched too many spy movies, crept toward Ray's barn. They thought they were slick, with their black sweatpants and bandanas, one clutching bolt cutters, another holding a clipboard like they were auditing the place. They didn't know Ray's barn was more than a pile of weathered wood. It held his life. Old tractor parts, a pair of motorcycles that hadn't roared since the 90s, and a chest of tools passed down from our granddad, worth thousands to the right buyer. They also didn't know Sheriff Walt Harlan was sleeping inside, buried in a pile of hay, with a shotgun and a bad mood. Walt wasn't supposed to be there. He'd been suspended from the sheriff's department for dozing off during a stakeout, something about falling asleep in the mayor's fish pond while chasing a burglar. Officially, it was negligent conduct, but really, Walt was just bone-tired, a man with no family, no hobbies, and 30 years of policing under his belt. Instead of going home, he'd set up camp in Ray's barn with a cot, a coffee pot, and a thermos of chili. Nobody knew, not even Ray, until those 6 HOA goons picked the wrong night to break in. I was crashed on Ray's couch, dreaming of city lights, when I heard what I thought was raccoons rummaging outside. I grabbed a flashlight and peeked through the window. That's when I saw them, slinking toward the barn like amateur ninjas. The door groaned like a dying beast when they pried it open, and that's what woke Walt. I swear, I saw it through the glass. An arm shot out of the hay, grabbed a shotgun, and then a blast tore through the barn ceiling. The night exploded into chaos. "Freeze, you HOA bastards!" Walt roared, leaping from the hay in nothing but boxer shorts printed with tiny sheriff's badges. A rooster, spooked by the noise, perched on his head like a feathered crown. One guy screamed, another bolted and slammed into the barn door, and a third, a retired accountant named Carl, dropped to his knees, yelling, "Don't shoot. I've got arthritis." A woman tripped over a rake and landed face first in the chicken coop. Walt didn't fire again. He just stood there, squinting, while the intruders froze, too stunned to move. I ran outside, barefoot, trying not to laugh as the scene unfolded. Ray stumbled out behind me, rubbing sleep from his eyes. We called the cops, or rather, Ray did, since Willow Creek only had 3 officers, and Walt was one of them. The part-time deputy from the next town overtook his sweet time getting there. Meanwhile, the trespassers sat in the dirt, some sobbing, others muttering excuses. The leader of this fiasco, Evelyn Sharp, wasn't among them. That was the first clue this wasn't just a prank gone wrong. Evelyn ran the Willow Creek Homeowners Association like a dictator with a gardening fetish. Leave your mailbox unpainted? $50 fine. Grass too tall? Warning letter. Hang laundry in your yard? You'd think you'd committed treason. Ray, though, lived just outside her jurisdiction, on a patch of land his family had owned for generations. His barn, creaky and cluttered, was an eyesore to Evelyn's Bayesian begonia empire. She called it a blight on community standards, but what she wanted was what lay inside her beneath it. See, 3 days before the break-in, Walt had gotten himself suspended. He'd been caught napping on the job one too many times, not from laziness but from sheer exhaustion. With nowhere else to go, he'd asked Ray if he could crash in the barn for a night. One night turned into 3, and he'd brought his whole setup, cot, chili, and a police radio he wasn't supposed to have. He parked his cruiser behind the hay bales and told no one. It was pure Lukier fate that he was there when Evelyn's crew showed up. Back in the barn, we found the tool chest pried open. A few treasures were gone. A rare Swiss wrench, a hand-carved mallet, a set of chisels from the 1800s. But what caught Walt's eye was a patch of disturbed dirt behind the shelves. They weren't just after tools, he muttered, pointing at the spot. They thought Ray was hiding something bigger. My stomach sank. This wasn't about stealing a few antiques. This was about secrets buried deep, and we were about to dig them up. The next morning, Willow Creek was buzzing like a hornet's nest. The town's gossip mill, mostly the local diner, and the community Facebook page was on fire. One post claimed Walt had gone rogue and was running a militia out of the barn. Another swore it was a cover-up for a UFO landing. My favorite was the guy who said Evelyn's HOA was a front for a knitting cult. None of it was true, but every rumor had a sliver of something real, the way small-town stories always do. Walt, back in his jeans and minus his badge, was pacing Ray's living room with a mug of cold soup and a county map spread across the table. They weren't after tools, he kept saying. That's the decoy. The real prize is buried. Ray, still picking hay out of his beard, wasn't convinced. You think Evelyn sent her goon squad to dig for pirate gold under my compost pile? Walt didn't smile. He tapped a red X on the map, right at the edge of Ray's property. This land used to belong to Amos Caldwell, your great-granddad's old pal. He got pinched for tax evasion and bootlegging back in the day. Word is, he buried something money, bonds, maybe papers before they hauled him off. Never said where. That name, Amos Caldwell, rang a bell. Granddad used to spin yarns about him, a sly crook who ran moonshine and bribed half the county. He went down during a church picnic, dressed as a preacher, and nobody ever found his stash. Just whispers, the kind that got passed around over whiskey and campfires. Walt thought Evelyn was after it, and maybe he was right. But first, we had to deal with the missing tools and the HOA acting like they'd done nothing wrong. Ray confronted Evelyn outside the community center, where she stood in a wide-brimmed hat and sunglasses, looking like a fading movie star dodging reporters. We were conducting a routine inspection, she said, smooth as silk. After complaints about your barn's condition, we acted for public safety. It's in the compliance addendum. Ray's voice rose. What complaints? Evelyn touched her necklace. All fake innocence. Anonymous reports are confidential under HOA guidelines. Walt stepped in, his voice low and sharp. Confidentiality doesn't cover breaking, theft, or intimidation. You're not the FBI, Evelyn. You're a garden club with a power trip. She blinked, smiled, and walked away, tossing back. See you at the next meeting, Sheriff. Or should I say ex-sheriff? I wanted to yell. Ray wanted to throw something. Walt just watched her go, like he was memorizing every step. That afternoon, Walt went full detective mode. Since he couldn't operate as a cop, he borrowed a Bluetooth mic from his nephew and set up an old laptop in a cooler, hacking into the HOA's Zoom meetings. They were usually dull, all talk of hedges and parking rules, but this time, Walt struck gold. The chat logs called the break-in Operation Shovelhead. They'd planned it for weeks, with phrases like secure the target assets and neutralize witnesses. One guy even joked about using sleeping gas if Walt was inside. The kicker? A note with GPS coordinates and the words beneath the east wall, confirm Caldwell ledger. Walt looked like he'd seen a ghost. They know about Amos Caldwell's ledger, he whispered. The tools were a distraction. They're after papers that could ruin this town. I asked, what ledger? Walt sighed, like I'd asked what air was. Caldwell's book. Names, payouts, blackmail notes. Politicians, judges, landowners, she had dirt on them all. If Evelyn gets it, she'll own Willow Creek. That night, we dug. Walt, Ray, and I, under the stars, behind the east wall of the barn. No words, just shovels and sweat. Around midnight, we hit something hard. Not a treasure chest, but a rusted metal hatch, bolted shut. Ray swore he'd never seen it. The bolts were old, and the hinges stuck. We need tools, Walt said, and we all laughed, the irony stinging. We covered it up and swore to keep it secret, especially from Evelyn. But the next morning, a notice was nailed to the barn door, stamped with the HOA's seal, condemnation order. The structure violates aesthetic standards. Demolition in 48 hours. Evelyn's signature was scrawled in red ink. We stood there, stunned, while chickens clucked at our feet. Walt crushed the notice in his fist. She knows what's under there, and she'll bury it forever. This wasn't funny anymore. It wasn't just small-town nonsense. It was war, and we had 2 days to fight back. The sun barely peeked through the fog that morning, casting Willow Creek in a haze that felt like the town itself was holding its secrets close. Ray's barn stood defiant, its weathered boards a silent challenge to Evelyn Sharp's condemnation notice. Inside Ray's kitchen, the three of us, me, Ray, and Sheriff Walt Harlan, sat in a tense quiet, sipping coffee that had gone cold. Walt, reinstated or not, was cleaning his shotgun with the focus of a man who'd seen too many fights to believe this one was over. Ray flipped pancakes, his eyes darting to the window like he expected Evelyn to roll up in a tank. I was on my second stack, still half convinced we were all caught in some fever dream fueled by barn dust and Ray's questionable pickled beets. "We're opening that hatch today," Walt said, setting his mug down with a thud. Nobody argued. Time was slipping away, and Evelyn's demolition order was a ticking clock. Ray grabbed a crowbar and some rusty pry bars from the shed, while Walt scouted the barn for signs of overnight snooping. The coast was clear, but in Willow Creek, you always felt watched neighbors peering through curtains, pretending to water their roses. We uncovered the hatch again, its rusted bolts groaning as we worked them loose. After an hour of sweating and cussing that'd make a sailor blush, the hatch gave way with a moan like something out of a horror flick. Below was a set of stone steps, descending into darkness. We stood at the edge, flashlights in hand, the air turning cold and heavy. Nobody said it, but we were all thinking the same thing. What if we found something we couldn't unfind? Not gold or jewels, but secrets that could burn this town to the ground. Walt went first, his flashlight beam cutting through the shadows. Ray followed, and I brought up the rear, each step making my chest tighter. At the bottom was a stone chamber, no bigger than a large closet. Sagging wooden shelves lined the walls, mostly bare, but in the center sat a metal box, dented and dusty, its latch locked tight. We dragged it out, grunting under its weight must be been 60 pounds. Walt popped the latch with his crowbar, and the lid creaked open. Inside were bundles of brittle papers, a few wax-sealed tin canisters, and, on top, a leather-bound ledger. The word Caldwell was etched into the cover in rough letters. We froze, the silence so thick you could hear our heartbeats. Walt opened it carefully, like it might bite. The pages were faded but clear, names, dates, dollar amounts, and cryptic symbols. It wasn't just a record of payments, it was a map of corruption. Blackmail notes, shady land deals, hand-drawn property lines with corrections scrawled in the margins. Some names were familiar, tied to streets or businesses in town, the kind you saw on plaques or park benches. One name jumped out, Harold Sharp, Evelyn's late husband. There it was, in black and white. $3,000 silence fee to Harold Sharp, 1986, for adjusting east fence line. Walt's voice was a whisper. "This barn's on stolen land. Your granddad never knew, Ray, but Amos Caldwell paid Harold to shift the boundary and claim part of the neighbor's plot. That's why Evelyn's after it. If this gets out, her family's legacy is fraud." We stood in that chilly chamber, holding a bomb disguised as a book. This ledger could ruin Evelyn, dismantle the HOA, and maybe take down half the county's elite. But it could also get us in deep trouble, legal, personal, or worse. We climbed back up, copied the key pages onto Walt's phone, and resealed the hatch, burying it under dirt and straw. Secrecy was our shield, but Evelyn's demolition was set for tomorrow. If that barn came down, the hatch and its secrets would be lost or worse, found by her. The next few hours were a blur. Walt made calls, not to the sheriff's office but to old contacts. A reporter he'd helped on a fraud case, a retired surveyor who knew the county's land records, even a former HOA board member who'd quit over creative accounting. Walt's reputation wasn't spotless, too many naps on duty, but nobody called him a liar. The surveyor confirmed the fence line scam. The ex-board member hinted at Evelyn's obsession with Ray's property, something about old debts. And an old buddy of Amos Caldwell, now in a nursing home, recalled Harold Sharp coming out of the woods one day with a shovel and a lie about fence repairs. Meanwhile, Ray and I turned the barn into a fortress. We rigged motion sensors from old Christmas lights and wired a boombox to blast Ray's old high school band if anyone crossed the threshold. It wasn't about stopping the demolition outright, we couldn't. We just needed to buy time until Walt could expose the truth. Then, late that afternoon, a courier from the county dropped off a bombshell, a land dispute filing, dated 3 days ago, signed by Evelyn Sharp. She claimed the barn sat on her property, based on a corrected boundary from a supposed family record. It was a legal land grab, bold and ruthless. "She's moving faster than I thought," Walt said, his jaw tight. "We've got to blow this open now." That night, we huddled in the barn, surrounded by tools and tension. Walt transferred the ledger's damning pages to a USB drive. He was heading to the town council at dawn, not just with evidence, but with a plan. If it worked, Evelyn's reign of law and rules and intimidation would crumble. As we locked the barn, I glanced at the floor where the hatch lay hidden. One rusty door had cracked open a town's worth of lies. And tomorrow, we'd let them all spill out. The morning broke heavy, fog clinging to the fields like a shroud. Walt was gone before sunrise, the USB drive tucked in his pocket like a grenade. Ray and I stayed behind, guarding the barn, knowing Evelyn wouldn't wait for a council vote. She played dirty, and we could feel trouble brewing. By 8 a.m., 2 unmarked trucks rolled into Ray's gravel lot. No logos, just tinted windows and a vibe that screamed trouble. 3 men stepped out, one built like a linebacker, another in wraparound sunglasses and fingerless gloves like he was auditioning for a B-movie, and a third, twitchy and chewing gum like it was his job. They didn't look like demolition workers. They looked like hired muscle. Ray asked who they worked for. The big guy grunted, "Compliance enforcement. HOA sent us." That was new. Since when did the HOA have its goon squad? They circled the barn, muttering to each other, ignoring us. Ray muttered something unprintable, and we retreated inside, waiting. We'd locked the tools away, hidden the ledger, and set up an old camcorder in the rafters just in case things got ugly. But if they wanted to tear this place down, they'd find a way. We needed Walt to come through. At 10 a.m., Evelyn arrived, striding up in a pantsuit sharp enough to cut glass, clipboard in hand like a general inspecting a battlefield. Her hired goons nodded, and she fixed Ray and me with a smile that could curdle milk. "You've had ample time to vacate," she said, flipping through her papers. "You've ignored notices, obstructed enforcement, and endangered this community. I'm authorizing immediate removal under the Emergency Beautification Clause." Ray's face reddened. "This isn't a weed, Evelyn. You're trying to erase my family's history." She didn't blink. "It was never your land, Raymond. Records prove it. You've been squatting for decades." I expected Ray to lose it, but he went quiet, then said, "Ever wonder what else might be buried here besides a fence line?" Her eyes flickered just a split second, but it was there. She knew something, maybe not about the hatch, but enough to be scared. Then, one of the goon's sunglasses guys spoke up. "Ma'am, we were told this was a compliance job. Nobody said anything about property disputes." Evelyn snapped. "You're here to follow orders, not ask questions." That didn't sit well. The linebacker-looking guy crossed his arms. "We don't tear down buildings without permits or court orders. Liability's a nightmare." Evelyn's face tightened. "I'll have your contracts canceled by noon if this barn's still standing." That's when Walt's cruiser skidded into the lot, gravel flying. He stepped out in full sheriff's uniform badge, hat, the works. Nobody knew how he'd pulled it off, but there he was, looking like he'd never been suspended. "Anyone touches this barn, they're going to jail," he said, voice calm but deadly. Evelyn's face went pale. "You have no authority." Walt held up a folded paper. "Town council injunction. And guess what, Evelyn? Your land dispute is based on a forged map. The county clerk confirmed it this morning. Harold Sharp fudged the lines 30 years ago for a payoff. Your claim's built on lies." She opened her mouth, but Walt wasn't done. He pulled out the USB drive and nodded at the twitchy goon's laptop. "Mind if I borrow that?" The guy handed it over, spooked. Walt plugged in the drive, and the ledger's pages lit up. Names, bribes, land scams. A small crowd of neighbors had gathered, and gasps rippled through them. "That ledger real?" someone called. Walt nodded. "As real as Evelyn's fake condemnation order." The goons exchanged looks, then walked back to their trucks and drove off. Evelyn stood frozen, her clipboard dangling, her perfect hair wilting in the heat. "You don't understand," she whispered. "This was Harold's plan. I was just finishing it." Nobody cared. The crowd had turned. Her empire was cracking. The air in Willow Creek felt charged that afternoon, like the calm before a thunderstorm. Evelyn Sharp's defeat at the barn hadn't ended the fight, it had only lit the fuse. Sheriff Walt Harlan, Ray Tucker, and I knew she wouldn't slink away quietly. Her empire of HOA rules and intimidation was crumbling. But people like Evelyn don't go down without a counterattack. As the sun dipped low, casting long shadows over Ray's barn, we braced for the next move. The ledger we'd found under the barn, a record of Amos Caldwell's dirty deals, implicating half the county's elite, was our weapon, but it was also a target. If Evelyn got her hands on it, she could burn the evidence or, worse, use it to blackmail her way back to power. Walt spent the evening on Ray's porch, sipping sweet tea from a thermos and scribbling in a notebook. He wasn't just planning, was strategizing, like a general mapping out a battlefield. Ray and I reinforced the barn, double-checking our makeshift alarms and stashing the ledger in a locked toolbox hidden under a pile of old blankets. We weren't naive enough to think Evelyn's goons wouldn't try again. The condemnation order was dead, but she'd already shown she wasn't above breaking the law. And then there was her nephew, Derek Sharp, a loose cannon with a chip on his shoulder and a knack for trouble. Derek showed up the next morning, strutting up Ray's driveway like he owned it. He was a wiry guy in his 30s, wearing mirrored sunglasses and a tactical vest that looked like it came from a costume shop. His grin was all teeth, the kind that made you want to check your pockets. Derek had been kicked out of the National Guard for creative insubordination, which was code for doing whatever he felt like. He leaned against the barn, arms crossed, and called out, "Heard there's some confusion about this land. Thought I'd clear it up." Ray stepped outside, wiping his hands on a rag. "You lost, Derek? The gun range is 3 towns over." Derek chuckled, unfazed. "Funny guy? Aunt Evelyn's got friends in high places, Ray." "Hi. She says if the barn can't be removed legally, maybe it just needs to disappear. Fires start easily in old barns like this." My blood ran cold. Walt, cradling his shotgun, stepped forward. "You even whisper arson around me, Derek, and I'll bury you so deep in county lockup they'll need a treasure map to find you." Derek didn't flinch. He pulled a remote from his vest and pressed a button. A faint buzz filled the air, and we looked up to see a black drone circling the barn, its camera blinking like a predator's eye. "What the hell is that?" I asked. Derek tapped the remote. "Surveillance. Just making sure no illegal stuff's going on here. You know, squatting, evidence tampering, hiding stolen goods." Walt's eyes narrowed. "You planning to do anything smart with that footage, or just fishing for trouble?" Derek shrugged. "We'll see." He sauntered off, but the drone stayed, hovering all day, watching. We held a war council in Ray's living room, surrounded by old maps, blueprints, and a box of mismatched wrenches. Walt had a plan, risky, theatrical, and maybe a little crazy. "If they want a show, let's give him one," he said. We spent the day turning the barn into a trap straight out of a spy movie. Walt dug up some expired police smoke canisters from his garage, still potent enough to create a fog. Ray rigged pulleys to drop hay bales at timed intervals, enough to spook anyone snooping. I hooked up an old Bluetooth speaker to play snippets of HOA meeting recordings we'd found on Walt's laptop. Angry arguments between Evelyn and her late husband, Harold, about keeping the ledger buried. It was part haunted house, part psychological warfare, designed to make Derek and his drone think twice. That night, we set the trap. The smoke canisters popped off, sending eerie plumes from the barn's eaves. The speaker blared looped audio. "Nobody can know what's under there," and "burn the ledger before it's found." The drone dipped low, its camera whirring, and we knew Derek was watching from somewhere nearby. Then Walt stepped out, his coat flapping in the wind, and pointed at the drone like he was calling down lightning. "We've got enough to bury your whole HOA, he shouted. "You want to fight? Bring it." The drone zipped away, and we held our breath. An hour later, Walt's phone rang. Not the sheriff's office, but a news station 2 towns over. Someone, likely Derek, thinking he'd caught us in a scandal, had sent them grainy drone footage of suspicious activity at Ray's barn. The reporters sounded intrigued, sniffing a story. Walt played it cool. "Meet me at the town square tomorrow," he said. "I'll give you the scoop of the decade." We didn't sleep that night. Ray grilled steaks, more to keep his hands busy than anything else. Walt sat on the porch, jotting notes. I rocked in a chair, staring at the stars, wondering how one barn could hold so much trouble. The next morning, Willow Creek's town square looked like it was hosting a county fair. Folks dragged lawn chairs from their garages and set up around the war memorial, clutching coffee thermoses and homemade muffins. Kids chased each other, dogs napped under benches, and a few old-timers waved signs reading "Save Ray's Barn" and "Down with the HOA." The air crackled with gossip. Half the town thought Walt was a hero, the other half thought he'd lost his mind. A news van from the regional station pulled in, and the reporter, a sharp young woman named Lisa, set up her camera with a mix of skepticism and excitement. Walt took the gazebo stage, his badge gleaming, the USB drive in his hand like a loaded gun. Ray and I stood off to the side, ready for anything. Lisa gave Walt the signal, and he plugged the drive into the council's outdoor projector. The screen flickered, then lit up with pages from Amos Caldwell's ledger, names, dates, payoffs, land scams. Walt let the images sink in, the crowd's murmurs growing louder. "These are records," he said, voice steady. "Not rumors, not guesses, facts. This ledger, found under Ray Tucker's barn, details illegal deals, bribes, and HOA coercion going back 50 years. Some names you'll recognize. Some are your neighbors. But this isn't about blame. It's about what we do next." The crowd shifted, tension thick enough to choke on. An old man in the front, a former councilman, stood up. "You're saying Evelyn and Harold Sharp orchestrated this to cover up a land grab?" Walt nodded. "That's the start of it. They buried the truth literally. When Ray's barn sat on top of it, they weaponized the HOA to tear it down." Gasps and whispers spread. Then Evelyn appeared, parting the crowd like a queen. She wore a navy blazer, her hair perfect, sunglasses hiding any fear. She stepped onto the gazebo without asking, and the air tightened. "My husband," she began, voice soft but calculated, "was a flawed man. He made choices I didn't always support. But he believed in order, in protecting this town's dignity. If mistakes happened, I'm sorry. Digging up old sins helps no one. Willow Creek needs to move forward." Walt raised an eyebrow. "You're not denying the ledger?" She paused, then said, "I'm saying it's irrelevant. Many of those people are dead. Others were misled. Dragging them into this circus doesn't fix anything." A voice cut through the crowed-in elderly woman on a scooter, her voice sharp. "You tried to bulldoze my cousin's barn." Nervous laughter rippled. Evelyn's cheeks flushed. Walt stepped forward. "This isn't about revenge. It's about truth, and giving a voice to folks who were silenced too long." He pulled out an envelope. "As of today, the county recorder voided the 1986 boundary fraud. Ray's barn is legally his. The HOA's claim is dead. And based on this ledger, the town council voted to dissolve the HOA, pending a full investigation into misuse of funds and abuse of power." The crowd erupted. Some clapped. Others sat stunned. A few looked relieved. Evelyn stood still, her clipboard limp in her hand. Then, without a word, she turned and walked away, her steps measured, like she was leaving a stage she'd never return to. Lisa's camera kept rolling as Walt wrapped up. "You don't heal a town by hiding its rot. You dig it up and start fresh. Willow Creek deserves better than backroom deals and HOA tyrants. Let's keep this barn standing. It's earned it." The applause started slow, then roared. Neighbors shook hands. Some teared up. Others came to Ray and thanked him for holding firm. It felt like the town had exhaled after years of holding its breath. But even as the crowd dispersed, I knew this wasn't the end. Evelyn might be down, but Derek was still out there, and the ledger's secrets hadn't all been told. We'd won a battle, not the war. That evening, Ray threw a barbecue at the barn, and half the town showed up. Kids ran through the fields with sparklers, a local band played Johnny Cash covers on a stage of hay bales, and someone brought a cake shaped like a wrench. Walt sat on the porch, finally smiling, as folks offered him pie like it was a medal. Ray pulled me aside, his voice low. "I used to hate this barn. Too much work, too much junk. Thought about tearing it down myself. Glad I didn't." I nodded, watching the laughter echo under the barn's beams. Some things are worth fighting for, even when the whole world says let it go. The barbecue at Ray Tucker's barn that night felt like a victory lap, but beneath the laughter and clinking beer bottles, a quiet unease lingered in Willow Creek. The town square showdown had exposed Evelyn Sharp's corruption, dissolved the HOA, and saved Ray's barn, but it also left a wound. Amos Caldwell's ledger had named names: politicians, landowners, even a few folks still walking the streets, and those secrets were now public. Some saw it as justice. Others saw it as a betrayal. Ray, Sheriff Walt Harlan, and I knew the fight wasn't over. Evelyn might have walked away, but her nephew Derek Sharp was still circling, and the ledger's full impact was just starting to ripple. The morning after the barbecue, Willow Creek was too quiet, like the hush before a twister. Ray was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with one eye on the window, half expecting Evelyn to show up with a lawyer or a bulldozer. "Walt, officially reinstated as sheriff despite some grumbling from the county, sat at the table, cleaning his shotgun with a calm that felt more like resolve than relaxation. I was nursing my fourth coffee, still processing how a week-long visit had turned me into a player in a small-town conspiracy. The barn stood outside, its scars and stains now badges of survival, but we all felt the weight of what lay beneath it. Around noon, trouble arrived, not Evelyn, but Derek. He rolled up in a beat-up Jeep, still wearing that tactical vest like he was auditioning for a militia. His mirrored sunglasses reflected the barn as he leaned against his hood, smirking. "Heard you boys think you've won," he called out, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. "Aunt Evelyn's not done, and neither am I. This land's got history, and it ain't yours." Ray stepped onto the porch, his voice steady. "Derek, the only history here is your family's lies. Take your Jeep and your attitude somewhere else." Derek laughed, pulling out his drone remote. "You think a little town meeting settles this? I've got eyes on you." He hit a button, and that damn drone buzzed to life, circling the barn again. Walt joined us, his shotgun resting on his shoulder. "You're trespassing, Derek. And if that drone so much as clips a shingle, I'll have you in cuffs." Derek's smirk didn't waver. "Just documenting. The public's got a right to know what's going on in that barn. Stolen land, hidden artifacts sounds like a story to me." He climbed back into his Jeep and peeled out, but the drone stayed, its camera blinking like a taunt. Inside, we regrouped. The ledger was still locked in the toolbox, but Derek's threats made it clear we couldn't sit on it forever. Walt had a plan, but it was a gamble. "We need to control the narrative," he said, spreading a county map across the table. "Derek's trying to spin this as us hiding something. Let's give him what he wants to show, but on our terms." Ray raised an eyebrow. "You want to bait him?" Walt nodded. "Him and anyone else Evelyn's got in her pocket. We leak just enough to draw them out, then catch him red-handed." We spent the day setting up the barn like a stage for a sting operation. Walt borrowed a few more smoke canisters from an old deputy buddy, claiming they were for training. Ray rigged tripwires to drop nets of straw, not enough to hurt, just to spook. I programmed the Bluetooth speaker to play more HOA recordings, this time with snippets of Evelyn's voice from the ledger's audio files, talking about erasing the evidence. We even rigged a fake ledger box, stuffed with blank papers, and left it in plain sight near the hatch. If Derek or his cronies broke in, they'd grab the decoy and think they'd won. That night, we waited in the dark, crouched behind hay bales. The drone was back, hovering low, and we heard footsteps outside. Not 6 this time, just 2, moving cautiously. The barn door creaked, and the tripwires snapped. Straw nets fell, followed by a yelp and some choice curse words. Walt flipped on a floodlight, revealing Derek and a wiry guy we didn't recognize, tangled in straw and looking like kids caught stealing cookies. "Evening, boys," Walt said, shotgun leveled. "Care to explain why you're in Ray's barn at midnight?" Derek sputtered. "This is entrapment." Walt chuckled. "No, son, this is trespassing. And that fake ledger you're clutching? Nice try." The other guy, pale and shaking, dropped his flashlight. "I just do what he pays me for," he stammered. Walt cuffed them both and called the deputy, who was faster this time, probably because he'd heard about the town square drama. As they were hauled off, Derek shot me a look. "This ain't over, city boy." The next morning, the local paper ran a story, Sheriff Foyle's second barn break-in. The reporter, Lisa, had gotten wind of the sting and was digging deeper, asking for interviews. Walt declined, but he sent her copies of the ledger's less explosive pages, just enough to keep the pressure on Evelyn's allies. The town was split. Some praised Walt and Ray as heroes. Others whispered that dredging up old scandals was tearing Willow Creek apart. At the diner, I overheard a heated argument between 2 old-timer sons, saying the ledger should be burned to let sleeping dogs lie. The other insisting every name in it deserved justice. It was the kind of debate that could keep a small town buzzing for years. Walt wasn't done. He'd been quietly building a case, not just against Evelyn, but against the network of corruption the ledger exposed. He met with the county prosecutor, a no-nonsense woman named Clara, who agreed to investigate. Clara warned that some names in the ledger, like a sitting judge and a real estate mogul, could make things messy. "You're stirring a hornet's nest, Walt," she said. He just shrugged. Been stung before. Meanwhile, Evelyn made her next move, not with goons or drones, but with lawyers. A cease and desist letter arrived at Ray's house, claiming he was defaming the Sharp family by spreading unverified documents. It demanded he surrender the ledger and publicly retract his accusations, or face a lawsuit that'd bankrupt him. Ray laughed, but I saw the worry in his eyes. He'd fought for the barn, but a legal battle could drain him dry. Walt, though, was unfazed. She's bluffing, he said. She knows a lawsuit means discovery, and that ledger will bury her deeper. To counter, Walt organized a second town meeting, this time at the community center. It wasn't as theatrical as the square, but it was packed standing room only. Lisa's news crew was there, along with a blogger from the city who'd caught wind of the Willow Creek barn saga. Walt took the stage, holding up the real ledger, its leather cover worn but menacing. This isn't just about Ray's barn, he said. It's about 50 years of lies, land stolen, deals made in backrooms, folks bullied into silence. We can't undo the past, but we can stop it from poisoning our future. He passed out copies of the ledger's key pages, redacting only the most sensitive names to avoid legal blowback. The crowd murmured, some nodding, others shaking their heads. A woman in the back, whose uncle was named in the ledger, stood up, tears in her eyes. My family's not perfect, but airing this hurts more than it helps. Why can't we move on? Before Walt could answer, another grizzled farmer named Ed, cut in. Move on? They stole my dad's land in '88, and I never knew why till now. I want answers. The room erupted in crosstalk, neighbors arguing over justice versus peace. Evelyn didn't show, but her absence spoke volumes. Word was she'd hired a PR firm to spin her as a victim of small-town vendettas. Derek, out on bail, was nowhere to be seen, but his drone footage had popped up on a shady blog, claiming Ray was hiding stolen artifacts. It got a few hundred views before the site was flagged for misinformation, but it showed Derek wasn't giving up. Walt suspected he was working for someone bigger, maybe one of the ledger's named players, desperate to keep their secrets buried. That night, we sat in the barn, the ledger locked away again. Ray ran his hand along the tool chest, his voice quiet. I used to think this place was just junk, old tools, old memories. Now it's like the whole town's history is tied to it. Walt nodded, staring at the floor where the hatch lay hidden. History's a heavy thing. You don't get to choose what it hands you, only what you do with it. I looked at them, two stubborn men fighting for a barn most folks would have let burn. I wasn't one of them, I was in too deep to walk away. The next day, Clara called with news. The judge named in the ledger had recused himself from a related case, citing personal reasons. It was a crack in the wall, proof that the ledger was shaking things up. But with progress came danger. As we locked the barn that night, we found a new note nailed to the door, not from the HOA but handwritten, in block letters. Give up the book, or the barn burns. No signature, but it reeked of Derek. Walt crumpled it, his eyes hard. They're scared, he said. That means we're close. The handwritten note nailed to Ray Tucker's barn door: give up the book, or the barn burns, hung over us like a storm cloud. Willow Creek had been split open by Amos Caldwell's ledger, its pages exposing decades of corruption, land theft, and backroom deals. Sheriff Walt Harlan, Ray, and I were at the center of it, guarding a barn that had become more than a building. It was a symbol of truth, stubbornness, and a town's chance to start clean. But with Evelyn Sharp's empire crumbling and her nephew Derek still prowling, we knew the fight was far from over. The note wasn't a bluff, it was a promise, and we had to act fast. The morning after the note appeared, Walt was already in motion. He'd spent the night on Ray's couch, his shotgun within arm's reach, and by dawn, he was on the phone with Clara, the county prosecutor. She'd started building a case against the ledger's big players, a judge, a real estate developer, and a former councilman, but she warned Walt to keep the original ledger safe. If it disappears, our evidence vanishes, she said. Walt agreed, but he wasn't just playing defense. He wanted to draw Derek out, and this before the barn went up in flames. Ray and I fortified the barn like it was Fort Knox. We replaced the old padlock with a heavy-duty chain, rigged more motion sensors, and moved the ledger to a fireproof safe Walt borrowed from the sheriff's office. Ray even dragged an old tractor to block the barn's main entrance, muttering, "Let him try to get through that." I set up a second camcorder in the rafters, streaming to Walt's laptop in case we needed proof of another break-in. The barn smelled of oil and straw, its walls creaking under the weight of its history, but it stood ready. Walt's plan was bold. Leak a rumor that the ledger was being moved to the county archives that night. He figured Derek, or whoever was behind the threats, would make a move to steal it before it left Ray's property. To sell the ruse, Walt called Lisa, the reporter, and accidentally let slip that the ledger was too hot to keep in Willow Creek. Lisa, sensing a scoop, ran a teaser on the evening news, historic document tied to local scandal to be relocated. Walt also tipped off a few gossipy regulars at the diner, knowing word would reach Derek's ears. By dusk, the trap was set. We hid in the barn, lights off, the fake ledger box back in its spot near the hatch. Walt crouched behind a stack of crates, his shotgun ready, but not loaded. He wanted arrests, not bodies. Ray and I waited near the tool chest, armed with flashlights and a crowbar. The air was thick, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. At 10 p.m., the motion sensors beeped. Footsteps crunched outside, then stopped. A faint buzz told us the drone was back, circling low. Walt whispered, "Here we go." The barn door rattled, then groaned as someone forced it open. Two figures slipped inside, moving fast. The tripwires snapped, dropping straw nets, and Walt hit the floodlight. Derek stood there, tangled and cursing, next to a burly man in a ski mask. "Freeze!" Walt barked, stepping forward. Derek lunged for the fake ledger box, but Ray tackled him, pinning him to the floor. The masked guy bolted, only to trip over the tractor and land in a heap. Walt cuffed them both, his voice calm but icy. "You boys don't learn, do you?" The masked man turned out to be a hired thug from out of town, paid by Derek to retrieve evidence. He sang like a canary, admitting Derek had promised him a cut of whatever they found. Derek, red-faced and defiant, spat. "You're all done when my aunt's friends get through with you." Walt just smiled. "Tell that to the judge, kid." The deputy arrived, lights flashing, and hauled them to the county lockup. The camcorder caught it all, every step, every word. The next morning, Willow Creek woke to Lisa's breaking news. Second arrest in barn scandal. Evidence points to wider conspiracy. The footage of Derek's botched break-in went viral locally, shared across Facebook, and even picked up by a regional paper. Clara moved fast, filing charges against Derek for trespassing, attempted theft, and conspiracy. She also issued a warrant for Evelyn, who'd gone quiet, but was now linked to Derek's actions through phone records. The ledger's remaining names were under scrutiny, and the judge stepped down, citing health concerns. The developer lawyered up, but his company's stock was tanking. Evelyn surfaced 2 days later, turning herself in at the sheriff's office. She wore no sunglasses, no perfect hair, just a tired woman in a plain coat. She didn't fight the charges, pleading guilty to lesser counts of fraud and obstruction in exchange for a lighter sentence. In court, she said only one thing: "I thought I was protecting my husband's legacy. I was wrong." Some felt sorry for her. Others saw it as a final dodge. Either way, her reign was over. The town council held a final meeting to tie up loose ends. They officially recognized Ray's barn as his, free of any claims, and allocated funds to repair its roof, calling it a historic site. The HOA was gone, replaced by a volunteer neighborhood committee focused on potlucks, not power trips. Walt was hailed as a hero, though he brushed it off, saying, "Just doing my job." Clara's investigation continued, promising more revelations. But for now, Willow Creek felt lighter, like it had shed a heavy coat. Ray threw one last barbecue, bigger than the first. The barn glowed with string lights, and the whole town came, kids with sparklers, old-timers with stories, even Lisa, who was writing a book about the barn that broke Willow Creek. Ray stood by the tool chest, his eyes soft. "I almost let this place go," he told me. "Thought it was just clutter. Turns out, it's where the truth lives." Walt, sipping coffee from a thermos, found a note tucked in the ledger's final page, written in Caldwell's faded scrawl. "If you're reading this, you're either trouble or justice. Choose wisely." He folded it, slipped it into his pocket, and smiled a real smile, not the tired one he'd worn for years. As the stars came out, I looked at the barn, its nicks and stains now part of its story. It had stood through break-ins, threats, and a town's worth of lies, not because it was strong, but because Ray, Walt, and even I, a city guy out of his depth, refused to let it fall. Willow Creek wasn't perfect. Some wounds from the ledger would take years to heal, but it was honest again, and that was enough. The next day, I packed my bags. My week-long visit stretched into a saga I'd never forget. Ray clapped me on the back. "You're not so city anymore, Tom." Walt nodded, handing me a spare key to the barn. "Come back anytime. Truth's always got room for one more." I drove out of Willow Creek, the barn shrinking in my rear view. But its shadow stayed with me, a reminder that some fights, no matter how small they seem, are worth every bruise. This story of Ray's barn isn't just about a building, it's about standing up to injustice, even when the odds are stacked against you. It's about the messy, sometimes violent struggle to uncover the truth in a world that often prefers silence. What do you think? Was Walt right to push so hard, risking the town's peace for justice? Should Ray have fought for the barn, or let it go to avoid the chaos? And what about violence? Did the threat of Walt's shotgun or Derek's arson go too far, or was it justified to protect what's right? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Share your stance, your stories, or just your take on where the line is between justice and vengeance. Let's keep this conversation going. Willow Creek's barn might be standing, but the fight for truth never really ends.